In the early 1950s, the threat of an all-out war loomed over the Soviet Union. If the nation was to protect itself from hostile nuclear-capable bombers incoming from the West, it needed a mighty fighter in its arsenal. But in the early 1950s, the USSR had no such aircraft. Specifically, the Soviet military was in search of a highly attuned type that could primarily intercept larger, slower, and high-flying heavy bombers. Not only that, but the new aircraft was to take off and reach the intruders in a matter of minutes. As a result of the specialized development requirements, the Tupolev OKB dusted off an old design for a supersonic aircraft and created the largest and heaviest fighter ever in service. A tough choice. In the midst of the Cold War, the Soviet Union faced a daunting challenge. They needed to protect their territory from nuclear-armed American bombers. Potentially, the hostile aircraft could breach their borders, particularly the long and vulnerable northern border. As they began setting up surface-to-air missile sites for defense, they quickly realized they could not afford to protect the entire country. Unfortunately, existing interceptors like the Yakovlev Yak-28P could only cover a small radius of a few hundred kilometers, which was insufficient for defending such a vast territory. Even the newly developed surface-to-air missiles had a shorter range. Moreover, it was economically impossible to maintain the sheer number of interceptors required to defend a 5,000-kilometer air front, leaving the Soviet Union able to provide modern air defense for only selected valuable areas. The PVO, the Soviet Air Defense Forces, faced a tough choice. They needed to cover the entire territory, but with a more spread-out defense. Thus, they put a great deal of resources into developing a robust air defense system to protect their nation. In 1955, they placed a requirement for a large area defense interceptor that could achieve this with sparse air bases. They needed a supersonic aircraft with enormous fuel tanks for good patrol time, long-range capable radar, and the most powerful air-to-air missiles possible. The first attempt at meeting these characteristics was the Lavochkin LA-250. It was a 30-ton interceptor prototype and the last aircraft designed by the Lavochkin Design Bureau. Although unsuccessful, the PVO search continued, and they remained determined to find a solution to this formidable challenge. Raw power. In the 1950s, Tupolev OKB designed a supersonic tactical bomber for the Red Air Force, designated Aircraft 98. The bomber was powered by twin Lyulka AL-7F afterburning turbojets and intended to have a top speed of at least 1,300 kilometers per hour. The aircraft had a spindle-shaped fuselage and swept flight surfaces, with the twin engines arranged side by side in the rear fuselage and an area-ruling concept on the fuselage. The mid-mounted wings had a leading-edge sweep of 55 degrees and featured a full-width wing fence roughly at mid-span. The tail surfaces were also swept. The remote-controlled tail turret boasted a twin 23mm cannon in a bullet fairing near the base of the tail fin. The internal bomb bay could accommodate a nuclear store or 4 FAB-1000 one-ton general-purpose conventional bombs. The aircraft had tricycle landing gear with a narrow stance on the ground. The 3 crew members, including a navigator bombardier in a glazed nose, a pilot in the front part of the cockpit, and a gunner radio operator behind him, all had ejection seats. While the pilot and gunner got into the aircraft through rear-hinged canopies and their ejection seats fired upward, it is unclear how the navigator got into the nose. It is possible that their seat slid out the bottom of the nose. The Lyulka engines provided 6,500 kilograms force dry thrust and 9,500 kilograms force afterburning thrust. The intakes were oval-shaped and located high on the fuselage behind the cockpit. There was a PRS-1 Argon radar gunnery targeting system situated in a fairing at the top of the tail fin, and an Initiativa bombing navigation radar in a fairing under the nose. Missiles or bombs. On July 7, 1956, Aircraft 98 took to the skies for its maiden flight. The controls were in the capable hands of test pilot V.F. Kovalyov. Plans for a production model, the Aircraft 98A, were in the works. Sketches showed several modifications, including the removal of the tail turret, a forward extension at the base of the tail fin with a cooling inlet in the front, and the relocation of the Initiativa radar to behind the nose gear. The landing gear would also be moved to wing pods, keeping with Tupolev's signature style. The Aircraft 98A would have carried a single P-15 anti-ship or standoff missile semi-externally in the belly, along with bombs on a single pylon under each wing. It was to be designated the Tu-24. Aircraft 98 soon caught the attention of NATO, which assigned it the reporting name Backfin. Other concepts based on Aircraft 98 were also considered, such as a zero-length launch plan, which would have used rocket-assisted takeoff gear to send the aircraft into the air. There was also talk of an Aircraft 98B with a single large engine and forward-swept intakes. However, none of these ideas ever came to fruition. Unfortunately, only one prototype was ever completed. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev preferred missiles over bombers, leading to the program's cancellation in February 1958. Despite this setback, the prototype continued to serve as a test and trial platform, and its legacy lived on in the various concepts inspired by it. Shapeshifter. In 1957, the Soviet Air Defense Service, PVO, requested that the Tupolev OKB begin adapting Aircraft 98 to serve as a heavy interceptor, with the interceptor designated as the Tu-28. With the prospect of Aircraft 98 fading as a bomber, Tupolev had good reason to push on with its development as an interceptor. Admittedly, the task was not easy. It was not just a matter of building a hefty supersonic aircraft, but also developing and integrating the various subsystems, including radar, 4 Bisnovit R-4 air-to-air missiles, and linkage into the PVO defensive system. The overall effort was designated the Tu-2880 complex, which was worked on by a network of development bureaus. The prototype took its initial flight on March 18, 1961. It made its first public appearance in the Tushino Air Parade. NATO assigned it the reporting name of Fiddler. The newly renamed Tu-128 was a massive fighter aircraft that entered service as an interceptor. With a maximum weight of 43 tons, it was the heaviest fighter in operation at the time, and in truth, the largest and heaviest fighter ever in service, a colossal fighter that could defend the Soviet Union's immense territories. Transformation. The aircraft had a broad, low or mid-mounted swept wing, with wing-mounted pods carrying the main landing gear and slab tailplanes. As unsophisticated as its avionics were, they were nonetheless reliable. The aircraft had poor visibility, and its high wing loading made it less agile. Even so, the Tu-128 was not designed for dogfighting smaller aircraft, but for combating NATO bombers like the B-52. At the time, Western experts mistakenly believed that the bulge on the belly of the aircraft was a large ventral radar for a mixed interceptor or AWACS role. This was not the case, as the bulge carried testing instruments. The production version of the aircraft lacked the bulge, and instead had a large nose radome housing a radar known as RPS Smerch. The radar had a detection range of nearly 50 kilometers and a lock-on range of 40 kilometers. The first interception of a drone target occurred in the fall of 1962. Pre-series machines were built, leading to production aircraft and introduction to service with the PVO in April 1965 as the Tu-128, with the complex similarly redesignated as the Tu-128S4. Usually, the Tu-128's outer pylons carried the R4Rs with semi-active radar homing. In contrast, the inner underwing pylons mounted the R4T infrared homing missiles. The aircraft notably lacked an internal weapons bay. Limbo. There are no records of Tu-128s taking down foreign aircraft. Nevertheless, there are stories and some records of intercepts of supposed spy balloons in the 1970s. Although there were talks of upgrading the Tu-128 with upgraded engines and next-generation avionics, it never materialized. There was also thought of developing a multi-role variant that could be used for strike and reconnaissance, but the Soviet military lost interest. From the mid-1960s, the Tupolev OKB considered follow-on designs to the Tu-128, initially focusing on the Tu-138, an improved version of its predecessor. The initial concepts didn't meet the specifications, and the OKB moved on to radically new ideas, including an aircraft with a delta wing and another with a cranked delta wing and forward canards. However, these designs were unsuccessful, and the project went into development limbo. In the 1960s, a revival was scaled back to an update of the Tu-128 for the pure interceptor role, with the intended customer being the PVO. The new Tu-148 was an evolution of the Tu-128 featuring variable geometry wings and ramp-type engine inlets. Production of the Tu-128 ended in 1970, with 198 aircraft built in total. But while it was never used to take down foreign aircraft, it served its purpose as a deterrent to foreign air intrusions during the Cold War.